Home Secretary, 10 years ago we didn't have small boat crossings, but now they're one of the biggest challenges your department faces. What's changed in the interim is we don't have the Dublin system. There's no mechanism for the Home Office to send back people to European countries where they should be. So my question is, are you looking at ways to work with European countries to strengthen that? And can you tell us how many gangs you've smashed so far?
So there's a series of factors, I think, behind what's happened. We've seen this big increase in small boat crossings over the last. You go back to 2018, and there was barely a handful, and since then, an entire criminal industry has taken hold along our borders with networks, including supply chains that spread right across the...
I want to be really specific about international cooperation on this issue, sorry. We don't have much time, so forgive me.
So in terms of strengthening the international cooperation, we obviously always said that we would like to see a replacement for the Dublin scheme and to recognise the impact of that. And it is something that there is evidence of people who arrive in the UK raising that as being a factor for them. But look, nobody should be making these dangerous boat crossings. They do undermine border security, they put lives at risk, and it was completely unacceptable, the numbers that we saw on Saturday, but also the continuing nature of the problem. The central focus of the cooperation that we are building at the moment, particularly with France, is their agreement to change the law about intervention in French waters, or to change their rules about interventions in French waters. They have a maritime review underway at the moment. We are very keen for them to implement that law change as rapidly as possible. And also, I was in Berlin last week, meeting with the German Interior Minister to talk about the stronger enforcement we need and their agreement to change the law in Germany so that we can go after the warehouses that are in Germany.
Would you see a return to Dublin as an option for the Home Office? Is it something you're pursuing, given when we had it before we didn't have small boat crossings?
So we have always said that we would like to see those sorts of arrangements and the replacement for that kind of arrangement. We obviously need to make sure that we've got a system in place that is workable. You also referred to the impact in terms of the gangs. We do. There is information that will be released later this afternoon about an additional set of arrests that have taken place in the UK, led by immigration enforcement, into a criminal gang network that has been running both illegal entry and also illegal working and facilitating illegal working, and we can send you those further details because we have substantially expanded the work that the National Crime Agency is doing, the work that the Border Security Command is doing, and the work both here in the UK. This particular example today is about a gang that has been operating based from here in the UK, but we also know there are particularly Iraqi Kurdish gangs and other gangs that have been operating in northern France that we're cooperating both with France and with Germany and with Iraq and the Kurdish regional government to be able to pursue those gang networks as well.
When I asked that question, I did not expect you to say you'd smashed a gang today. So that's very interesting to hear. One final question from me, which is a lot of the people who come over in small boats end up in these asylum hotels, which are so controversial. They have cost the Home Office £7 billion over this contract. They are creating huge issues in local communities, and it's actually quite difficult for some asylum seekers themselves. Moreover, it is overseas development assistance. This is money the UK says we want to send to the poorest people in the world. We had the providers in, and they told us that they have only been penalised 3% of the time, and they've only paid £4 million out of their £400 million in profits. Now, you have a break clause coming up in these contracts next year. Please tell me you're at least considering breaking those contracts, or at least substantially revising them.
Well, we've inherited these contracts.
I recognise it was all inherited.
I am concerned about the level of money that's gone into these contracts. Also, look, the scale of the backlog that we inherited. We need to end asylum hotels altogether. Some of that is about bringing the whole backlog down, being able to clear the decision making. We have.
To interrupt, we're going to come into some questions
So
on the
sorry,
asylum
I'll come back to
backlog.
that.
No, it's absolutely fine. I'm just conscious of
So
time.
in terms of the management of the contracts, well, we've introduced tighter conditions of the contract. I think you have Minister Angela Eagle giving you more evidence on that, who can talk through some of the details of that. You'll know that we have been taking action to remove one of the suppliers, Stay Belvedere, from the supply chain as part of the tighter contract management. We'll keep all contracts under review, but I think the core issue we have to do here is bring the overall numbers down in the asylum accommodation system.
Sean Davis.
2 points. Just on the provider question, we had the National Audit Office brief us in the report. We've also had the providers themselves who said they've put tens of millions of pounds aside to pay back to the Home Office through excess profits. Why on earth hasn't the Home Office taken that money back and used that money for the priorities of the British people?
So we have already taken a series of steps since the election to drive better value through the contracting process. We're saving hundreds of millions of pounds already since the election, both compared to previous years and also compared to the plans that we have inherited as a result of those changes, and are also looking at further changes in order to be able to drive those costs down and to be able to get better value.
I absolutely appreciate that, Home Secretary, but we had providers in front of us who said that they've literally put tens of millions of pounds aside and they haven't paid it over to the Home Office because the Home Office haven't asked yet.
Yeah, so this is the profit share mechanism. We can go into the detail next Tuesday with Dame Angela Eagle, but essentially we're doing the audit of the money at the moment, and once we've been through the audit, we will request the money that is due.
And one final question. This is clearly a huge issue for the electorate, for constituencies. Is it not time now for a radical solution around the application of the European Convention of Human Rights, and whether or not we really need to look differently at the interpretation of that convention, or completely disapplying ourselves from it in part, either on a temporary basis or on a permanent basis?
So, interesting, compliance with international law has already helped us get new agreements in place with France and with Germany to help tackle some of the serious problems with the criminal gangs operations that we face. So the agreements with France, as you may know, the previous government tried over about 6-year period to get the French government to agree to intervene in French waters, and at each stage they would not do so. They have agreed to do that now, but part of the way in which we have been able to build up that much stronger cooperation is also by saying we recognise we will continue to comply with international law. Similarly with Germany, with their ability and commitment to changing the law. So, however, we also need to look at the way in which laws are being interpreted. So, as we put in the immigration white paper, there are areas, for example, where the system around family migration has become so complex. The proportion of decisions being taken as exceptional, often under interpretations around the ECHR, around particularly Article 8, end up being about 30% of the cases. Well, that's not exceptional, that is a much broader proportion. So, but that reflects some of the complexity of the system and the overall system and the way in which the decisions have been based on a series of court decisions as opposed to having a clear framework set out by Parliament that then can be much easier for the courts to interpret and much more reflect what I think the public would want to see. So we are looking at that.
We are
as
going
part
to have
of
to
it.
move
Sorry,
on. It's all right.
Chair.
I realise we've got 5 minutes and Paul Kohler has got questions on the asylum system.
At last. As you mentioned it, Home Secretary, I refer the committee to my register of interests. One of my donors, Safwan Adam, had an interest in Stay Belvedere. There are something like 250,000 asylum seekers in the system at the moment. I know you inherited this backlog, but when are you expecting to clear it?
So we've already had a significant drop in the number of people waiting an initial decision. So the we've speeded up decisions very substantially since the election. including speeding up the initial decisions, including also taking action as part of the Border and Security and Asylum Bill to introduce statutory timetables for appeals. Because whilst we can make substantial progress on the initial decisions, and we are doing so on those and expect that to continue to come down over the coming months as well.
What's the target on that? What are you looking at with regard to the initial decision? When should that be made and by what time?
So I was just scrolling through my pages that maybe that excellent. The number with initial decisions are more than double those in the 3 months before the election in the period of January to March. We're going to continue with that high level of decision making, and that should bring the initial decision making down. There's obviously a certain point at which the process, it just becomes the number of people, the time it takes then for process decisions to go through the system.
Though? What's that target to make an initial decision? So, what's the time target?
Duration? So we are expect over the course of this year and certainly over the course of the next 6 months to lead to a very substantial drop in the level of initial decision making or the backlog on initial decision making. But if we don't have this legislation go through on the appeals system, then we will still end up with long, unacceptable delays in the system. So we're introducing the statutory timetable for making appeals decisions so that we can also speed things through, both for initial decisions and then to have the appeals decisions also speeded up as well.
I'll answer my question though about a target for the initial decision. Do you not have a target for the initial decision?
So at the moment, we are still working through a backlog of cases that have been in the system for a considerable amount of time. And as the Home Secretary was saying, there'll always be a level of what we call unworkable cases in that system, people who are up for trial or something. So until we have got through that backlog, which will be of longer cases, and we've still got about a third of cases that have been in the system for longer than a year, which goes back to the delays last year through the IMA. We need to work through all of that in order to then establish the rhythm and whether or not we're going to put some sort of target service level agreement around initial decisions.
The backlog's down to 79,000 in the most recent figures. Actually, it's continued to fall since then. Those are the most recent published figures, and that in itself was a 13% drop on the previous quarter. So that's the pace at which we're making decisions at the moment. We will continue to make initial decisions at that current pace, but we also need to make sure that we speed up the appeals as well.
I understand all of that. Why are you resistant to actually declare that you have a target for the initial decision to be made? Or why is that so difficult? You're going for a target for appeals period, so why are you reluctant to
You mean a
target?
timetable?
How long should it take for the initial decision to be made?
Look, well, so part of the reason for that is because the new system, we are going to set out further reforms to the asylum system, but one of the things that I have always been keen to do is to have a system for fast-track decisions and appeals, so that for people, if people arrive from predominantly safe countries, actually they shouldn't be sitting in the asylum system for a long time at all. We should be able to take those decisions really fast, be able to take those decisions, make sure that they go through the appeal system really fast, and then also make sure that they are returned really quickly as well. So that would mean a fast-track system alongside the main asylum system. I think that would be really important in terms of making sure that the system is fair. That will require legislation in order to be able to do that, as well as new system design. So part of the reason, I do understand the question that you're asking, but part of the reason is because I actually think there should be faster tracks for those cases so that we can get those through the system really quickly, really within a matter of months.
And when are we talking about this legislation? I understand the reason why we need such fast tracks. What are we talking about?
So the first phase of legislation that we've introduced in this area is the Border Security Act. That obviously brings in the counter-terrorism powers in terms of tackling the small boats and the criminal gangs. does also include some measures around this, including the statutory timetable on appeals. We do want to bring forward further legislation. We will announce further measures on this as soon as we are able to, and I will update the committee as soon as I can.
I just want to focus my questioning on child sexual exploitation and gang-related grooming. Home Secretary, last month I met with your colleague, the Safeguarding Minister, alongside a leading child abuse lawyer, David Greenwood, who has acted on behalf of many of those victims and survivors of the Rotherham cases. And we presented a dossier to your department which outlined that they're concluding that there is potentially tens of thousands of children across Keighley and the Bradford district that have been exploited going back to the 1990s. And I hope that this has made it to your desk. And despite growing calls for a local inquiry, the dossier also listed the documented refusals that we've had at a local authority level and indeed across the mayoralty as to the fact that we should not have a local inquiry, which is deeply concerning to me. So the questions I've got is, are you worried about the situation in the Bradford district? And does it not set off alarm bells to you that local leaders in Bradford were rejecting the prospect of a local inquiry within hours of your statement that you gave to the floor of the House in January, well before they would have had time to read the contents of your announcement, indeed analyse it properly?
Yes, I know that the Safeguarding Minister has met with you, and thank you for the information and evidence that you've provided. I mean, this is a truly vile crime, and I think it has really disturbing lifelong consequences for the children, the teenagers, the very often teenage girls who have been raped, abused, and just subjected to the most horrendous of crimes. And so thank you for raising those cases. And the Safeguarding Minister has also met with some victims from Bradford, as well as from other parts of the country as part of the response. Just to, I suppose, update you in terms of where we are on this. We obviously asked Baroness Casey to do the audit of the nature and scale and patterns of child sexual exploitation and abuse, the different gang abuse right across the country. She has asked for a short extension. I've obviously written to the committee based on that. We, I think, do need her audit to inform the sort of next steps and decisions around the local inquiries. We are clear that we've said from the start we would support at least 5 local inquiries. With Oldham, we are working underway already, but we are waiting for Baroness Casey's report back. So I do recognise, and the Safeguarding Minister has recognised, the particular case that you've raised around Bradford. We are waiting for Baroness Casey's report before we can take the next steps on that.
I completely acknowledge that, and thank you for that response, Home Secretary. And I will look at that report when it gets released. But the reality of it is that report is not looking specifically at local authorities. It's more focusing on police forces. So the point that I want to put to you is, at Bradford Council, we were given the reasoning by our leader that a report would be too expensive for a local authority to pursue. And my understanding is, based on the announcement you gave back in January, that there would be about a £5 million allocation for 5 local audits, local inquiries to take place. So if Bradford was to be one of those and that money was allocated, would you expect the leadership at Bradford to get behind that?
We have identified funding to ensure that we can make sure there is additional funding for local inquiries. Clearly that is important. And once the Casey review and the Casey audit has reported back to us, we will set out those next steps, both about how we will then expect local inquiries to be taken forward and also the funding support that we will give. Obviously, we want all local organisations and agencies, including councils, including other local organisations, to support local inquiries. I think that has been immensely important. We are looking at the overarching thing, because There is clearly an issue about policing. There is also an issue about local authority responsibilities, because very often victims were in care or were in areas where other social services had engagement with victims, and so there are responsibilities there. On the policing side, as you'll know, I have also always said the most important thing is to get perpetrators behind bars and to make sure that they face justice for these horrendous crimes. And I can update the committee on that, because I did ask all police forces to review historic cases. Half of all forces have reported back to the Home Office, and the idea is we've asked them to review cases that were closed where no further action was taken, and where there are cases to then work with the task force, the Police Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force, which is the national task force which has considerable expertise, to then review those cases and to look to reopen and pursue any new lines of inquiry that have not been properly pursued. For around half of all forces have reported back to the Home Office. Now we are waiting for the reports back from the other half of police forces. For those forces, 287 historic cases have been identified for review by the Police Child Sexual Exploitation Task Force, and I will keep the committee updated with progress on that.
And may I just expand on bringing it back to local authorities? And this is, don't forget, this is a local authority that has had children's services taken away from it under the previous administration with a new trust structure set up. So there's deep levels of concern about what's going on in Bradford. One of the reasons was, as I've already said, was it will cost a huge amount of money. The second reasoning was the leader of Bradford Council argued that the inquiry, if we had one in Bradford, would simply be paying somebody to write another report, and that there would be no new learning. So can I just put the point to you? Do you agree with Bradford Council's local leadership in thinking that these local inquiries will provide absolutely no new information or learning?
So what we found from the experience of the Telford inquiry, and also actually the if you go back into the initial Rotherham inquiries that took place, the two different Rotherham reviews that took place even back 10 years ago, one by Alexis J and one by Baroness Louise Casey, is that in different forms, and those were actually, there were three different kinds of reviews that took place. The Alexis J one, the Louise Casey one, which was under Local Government Act powers, and then the Telford inquiry, which was set out locally. In each of those cases, they uncovered important new local information, but also they provided a basis for action to be taken, and in particular action to be taken both to go after perpetrators and to ensure that new standards are in place. So, as I've said, we will take forward the next steps around those local inquiries is when we have the audit back from Baroness Casey. But we are clear that local authorities can play inquiries can play a very important role in this process.
Which is excellent to hear. The point that I'm trying to make here is local authorities are coming up with excuses. I'm absolutely seeing that within my own area of Keighley and the wider Bradford district as to why not to have one. Will it be the case where we have local authorities that refuse to put themselves forward to be having an inquiry, that you, as using your powers as the Home Secretary, will step in? Because why on earth are we allowing it to be a voluntary approach at the moment, which is effectively allowing local authorities to mark their own homework? So will it be the case, if Bradford Council continue to refuse, that you would step forward and make Bradford Council get behind your calls for a local inquiry to take place?
The first thing I would say is these have to be independent inquiries. So these can't be inquiries that are done by local authorities. They have to be independent inquiries, and it's only independent inquiries that we will provide funding for. That's what happened with the Telford inquiry. Although it was initiated by the local authority and local organisations, it was then conducted independently. That is crucial. This is, I do understand the questions you're raising, but some of these are the points we will respond to once we get Baroness Casey's audit, because part of what she's looking at is what are the key areas, what are the key issues that are raised in terms of what we know at the moment. and we need to ensure that the framework for those local inquiries and also other reforms that we will need to introduce reflects that evidence and reflects that information. This needs to look at issues around both being able to get to the truth in terms of the police investigations, but also making sure there are proper accountability mechanisms in place. So we're alive to all of those points. We raised some of those points actually at the very beginning of this process when we identified some of the principles that we needed to reflect. We obviously, I think when we had agreed this, the timings for this, we might have had responses earlier, but we are waiting for Baroness Casey's audit, and I hope other people will understand that's important.